Hoş geldiniz. Welcome. Hun bir hatin, haraglast, hoşamadid, hoş geldiniz. Em, Afganistanlı kadınların mevcut şu anda yaşadıkları durum ve mücadelelerine odaklanan Ekim 2025'te Madrid'de gerçekleşen Afganistan Kadınları Halk Mahkemesi deneyimini kendilerinden dinleyeceğimiz 320. haftalık toplantımıza hoş geldiniz. Bu EŞİK'in 320. haftalık toplantısı, neredeyse 6 yıl. Afganistan'da kadınların ve kız çocuklarının içinde bulunduğu durum, bugün dünyada kadın hakları açısından yaşanan en büyük kriz ve etkilerini hem bölgede hem dünyada hissediyoruz. Bugün aramıza katıldığınız için hepinize bu önemli konuyu konuşmak için aramıza katılan herkese özellikle de az sonra bu girişten sonra tanıtacağım konuşmacılarımız Shaharzad Akbar ve Ghizaal Haress'e teşekkür ediyoruz. Kayıt başlamadan önce iletemedim. Şimdi katılanlar için söyleyeyim. Assuming you all agree, also Şehrazat and Ghizaal, konuşmacılarımızın da izniyle kayıt alıyoruz. Daha sonra önümüzdeki haftalarda EŞİK'in YouTube kanalından bunu yayınlayabiliriz. Uygun mudur? It's okay, Şehrazat and Ghizaal. Thank you. Birazdan da bir fotoğraf çekeceğiz. Biz haftalık toplantılarımızda hep bir fotoğraf alıyoruz. Bunu yayınlamıyoruz aslında. Bazen toplantılarımızın basın açıklamasıyla beraber yayınladığımız oluyor. Bunda da öyle bir durum olabilir. O yüzden fotoğrafta olmak istiyorsanız lütfen önümüzdeki birkaç dakika boyunca kameranızı açın, açık tutun. İstemiyorsanız kapatabilirsiniz tabii. Kendimi tanıtayım. Benim adım Özlem Altıok. Bugünkü toplantının kolaylaştırıcılığını yapıyor olacağım. Kısaca tanıtmam gerekirse kendimi, Türkiye'den feminist bir sosyoloğum ve şu anda ABD'de akademisyenim. Kuzey Teksas Üniversitesi'nde ders veriyorum. Aynı zamanda uzun zamandır e, kadın hareketinin içerisindeyim. 2009 senesinden beri Eşitlik İzleme Kadın Grubu Eşitiz'in. 2020'den beri de Eşitlik İçin Kadın Platformu'nun içinde aktif olarak çalışıyorum. Toplantıyı Türkçe takip edebilen hemen herkes eşiği biliyor. O yüzden müsaadenizle toplantının ev sahipliğini üstlenen eşik olarak bizi İngilizce olarak tanıtmak istiyorum. So the English for our non-Turkish speakers.
Evet, Türkçe konuşmayan arkadaşlar için eşiği biraz tanıtacağız. Eşitlik için Kadın Platformu, eşik kısaca. 2020 Covid pandemisinin tam ortasında kuruldu ve aslında 10 yıllarca Türkiye'deki kadın hareketinin ve feminist savunuculuğun ve çeşitli LGBT örgütlerinin emeğinin de sonucu ve yeni bir örgütlenme aslında ve aslında kadınların haklarına yönelik saldırılara karşı yeni bir örgütlenme ve toplumsal cinsiyet eşitliği talebiyle otoriter rejim karşısında oluşturulmuş olan bir rejim. İngilizceyi alacaksınız arkadaşlar. Türkiye 2011 yılında İstanbul Sözleşmesi'ni imzalamıştı ve bizim de baskılarımızda ve bizim Cumhurbaşkanımızın kararıyla birlikte çekildi ve eşik aslında birçok konuda kampanya yürütüyor ve kadınların nafaka hakları gibi toplumsal cinsiyet temelli şiddet ve cins kırıma karşı mücadeleleri sürdürüyor ve özellikle laiklik ve toplumsal cinsiyet eşitliği artan otoriterizm karşısında savunuyor ve ayrıca çeşitli açıklamalar yapıyoruz, basın açıklamaları yapıyoruz ve özellikle küresel öneme sahip savaşlar, soykırımlar gibi konularda ve özellikle Afganistan'daki toplumsal cinsiyet apartheidi gibi konularda açıklamalar yapıyoruz ve Türkçeden dinleyeceksiniz arkadaşlar. Başka bir veya bu kadar çok farklı kadın grubunu aslında bir araya getiren ülke çapında coğrafi olarak ve politik olarak başka bir kadın örgütü bilmiyorum. Çok fazla politik görüş ve örgütlenmeyi barındırıyoruz, pozisyonu barındırıyoruz. Ve her hafta neredeyse 6 yıldır her hafta düzenli olarak toplanmak. 2 hafta sonra EŞİK'in 6. yıl dönümünü kutlayacağız. EŞİK'te bu birlikteliği mümkün kılan herkese teşekkür etmek istiyoruz. Tabii ki bu kolay değil. Zorlukları var ama çok önemli bir başarı ve EŞİK'te gönüllü olarak aslında biz vasıflarımızla katkıda bulunuyoruz. Sosyal medya, raporların yazılması, toplantıların örgütlenmesi, bunların tamamını gönüllü emeğimiz ve becerilerimizle gerçekleştiriyoruz ve bir takım sorunlar olursa tabii ki bu toplantılar sırasında çok fazla sorun olmamasını umuyoruz. Şunu söylemek istiyorum. Aslında EŞİK çeviri sunuyor bütün uluslararası toplantılarda dil eşitliği, dil adaleti gereği. Çünkü bir başka dil öğrenmek bir ayrıcalık ve tabii ki bunu herkes karşılayamıyor. Ve şu anda Müge Yıldırım ve Çiğdem'e teşekkür etmek istiyorum. Özellikle de çeviri işinde de başarılar diliyorum. Kolay gelsin diyorum bize. Evet, şimdi Türkçe'ye geçeceğim. Siz diğer arkadaşlar
bir şeyler söylemek istiyorum. Öncelikle eşin Afganistan konusunda bu durumla ilgili çalışmalarını özetlemek için bir 2 dakika ayıracağım. Ardından Şehrazad'ı ilk konuşmacımızı tanıtacağım. Sonra bu toplantı için Türkçe altyazısı hazırlanan, ilk kez burada gösterilecek Türkçe altyazıyla 13 dakikalık Afganistanlı Kadınlar Halk Mahkemesi videosunu izleyeceğiz beraber. Kısa bir video ardından sözü Ghizaal Haress'e bırakacağım. Yaklaşık 45 dakika sürecek bu ilk yarıdan sonra soru ve cevap ve dayanışma önerileri için 45 dakikamız daha olacak. Ve sanırım bu söylemek istediğim her şeyi kapsıyor şu anda. Şimdi rica etsem herkes kameralarını açabilirse, fotoğrafta olmak isteyenler tabii, herkes açmak zorunda değil. Let's take a photo with those who are willing. I don't know who else is taking the photo, but I'm used to taking photos, so I'm doing it also.
evet fotoğraf alıyoruz şu anda.
Thank you everyone. Teşekkürler. Okay, so I
Evet.
want to bulunduğumuz yerden öncelikle Afganistan'da olan bitene dair neler yaptığımızı özetlemek şu anlamda önemli. Direniş ve dayanışma eylemlerimizin tarihini kaydetmek önemli. Biz kaydetmezsek kimse kaydetmeyecek zaten. O yüzden de bu kısa özeti İngilizce yapacağım. Çünkü EŞİK içerisinde arkadaşlarımızın çoğu bundan haberdar. So a first quick recap of what EŞİK has done with regard to
Evet,
how we respond.
EŞİK neler yaptı Afganistan'la ilgili, Afganistan'da olup bitenlerle ilgili olarak? Çünkü direniş tarihlerimizi ve aktif dayanışmalarımızı kayıt altına almak önemli. Bu Afganistan'daki durumla ilgili ilk toplantımız değil, Shaharzad'la ilk kez karşılaştığımızda EŞİK aslında ilk örgütlenmelerden biri dünyadaki. İlk örgütlenme değilse bile Taliban'a karşı konuşan 2021'de ABD'nin geri çekilmesi Afganistan'dan sonra iktidara gelmesinden sonra 27 Ağustos'ta hemen hem emperyalist savaşları Afganistan'a karşı sürdürülen hem de Taliban'ın iktidara gelmesinin kadınlar açısından ne anlama geleceğini söyleyen bir basın açıklaması yapmıştık. Son derece güçlü bir basın açıklamasıydı ve ve çok güçlü bir şekilde Taliban'ı tanımadığımızı ve Taliban'ı tanıyanları da tanıdığımızı da söylemiştik. Ve bu tabii çok net bir pozisyondu ama çok rahat bir pozisyonda değildi. Çünkü hedef haline getirildik ve birkaç gün sonra bu açıklamadan EŞİK bir uluslararası toplantı düzenledi. Hepiniz hatırlayacaksınız ve yüzlerce katıldı aslında 5 kıtadan ve bu ilk toplantı sonra ve katılanların motivasyonu bir şey yapma konusundaki motivasyonu sayesinde 21 Ağustos'ta bir toplantı daha yaptık ve bu toplantılardan sonra başka toplantılar da düzenledik ve 1 Eylül'de de bir sosyal medya eylemi yaptık. Bunları söylüyorum çünkü kullandığımız temel hashtagler Afgan kadınlarının yanındayız, Taliban'a hayır, kadın haklarına evet, temel hashtaglerimiz bunlardı sosyal medya eylemimizde 2021'deki 1 Eylül'de ve Afganistan'daki kadınların seslerini büyütmek için uğraşıyoruz. Aynı zamanda İranlı kadınları ve Afganistan'daki rejimi de bir toplumsal cinsiyet apartheidi olarak adlandırıyoruz ve Afganistan konusundaki Birleşmiş Milletler özel raportörüne de kadınların ve kızların Taliban rejiminde karşı karşıya kaldıkları ihlallerle ilgili uyarılarda bulunduk, toplantılar yaptık, çok fazla STK ile birlikte işler yaptık. Burada duracağım ama kişisel bir şey de hissettiğimi paylaşmak istiyorum. Bu notları hazırlarken bu toplantı için zamanda geriye gittim 2021'e. Ve bu acilen yazdığımız basın açıklaması, hızla yaptığımız toplantılar, mektuplar ve aynı zamanda Afganistan'dan çıkmaya çalışan kadınlarla başka ülkelerde eğitim görmek ya da başka onlarla dayanışma içinde olmaya çalışan kadınlarla kişisel temaslarda da bulundum ve üzerinden 5 yıl geçtikten sonra çok büyük tabii ki bir hayal kırıklığı da duyuyorum, üzüntü de duyuyorum çünkü dürüst olmak gerekirsek bugün Afganistan'daki Taliban rejiminin kadınlar ve kız çocukları için ne anlama geldiğini düşününce bu son derece bizim açımızdan hayal etmesi mümkün olmayan bir şey. Bütün kısıtlamalar, en temel hakların ihlal edilmesi, sağlık hakkının, hareket etme hakkının, eğitim hakkının ihlali gibi durumlar ve ayrıca şunu da biliyoruz ki tabii ki Afganistan'ın son derece zor şartlar altında verdikleri kadınların ve kız çocuklarının verdiği mücadeleyi de biliyoruz. Protesto etmeye devam ediyorlar ve bazen de gizlice ve yer altında eğitimlerini sürdürmeye çalışıyorlar ve bugün bununla ilgili deneyimi olan konuşmacı arkadaşlarımız var ve hepimiz Afganistan'daki kadınların verdiği mücadeleden esin duyuyoruz ve Afganistan'dan bugün sürgünde kadınların ve kız çocuklarının hakları hakkında mücadele etmeye devam eden 2 konuşmacıyı ağırladığımız için onur duyuyoruz. Ve bu 2 konuşmacı arkadaşımız Madrid'de 2025 Ekim ayında Madrid'de Afganistanlı kadınlar için hak mahkemesi örgütlenmesine katıldılar.
Kuruluş sürecini ve hedeflerini biraz bize anlatacak olan Shaharzad Akbar'ı tanıtmak istiyorum. I want to introduce you Shaharzad. I will do it in Turkish. Türkçe olarak tanıtacağım. Ardından bu toplantı için Türkçe altyazılı olarak hazırlanan videoyu izleyeceğiz. Shaharzad Akbar, welcome, hoş geldin. Afgan İnsan Hakları savunucusu ve Afgan İnsan Hakları Örgütü Rawadari'nin direktörüdür. Rawadari, ihlalleri izlemeye, hesap verebilirliği teşvik etmeye ve sivil alanı savunmaya odaklı bir kuruluş. İnsan hakları, demokratik yönetişim ve uluslararası kalkınma alanlarında 15 yılı aşkın deneyime sahip olan Shaharzad, kadın hakları ve adalet konusunda önde gelen bir sestir. Daha önce 2019'dan Ağustos 2021'e kadar Afganistan Bağımsız İnsan Hakları Komisyonu Başkanlığı görevini yürütmüş ve çatışmaların tırmandığı kritik bir dönemde ulusal insan hakları izleme ve üst düzey savunuculuk çalışmalarına öncülük etmiştir. Kabul'ün düşüşünden bu yana Şahrazad sürgünden hayati çalışmalarına devam ederek Birleşmiş Milletler Güvenlik Konseyi, İnsan Hakları Konseyi ve ilgili hükümetler de dahil olmak üzere uluslararası kuruluşlara düzenli olarak bilgi vermektedir. Rawadari'nin direktörü olarak mevcut çalışmaları insan hakları izleme ve raporlama, mağdur merkezli adalet ve Afganistan'da insan hakları için ittifakların genişletilmesine yoğunlaşmaktadır. Shaharzad, Oxford Üniversitesi'nden kalkınma çalışmaları alanında yüksek lisans ve Smith College'dan lisans derecesine sahiptir. Yazıları Washington Post, Foreign Policy, Just Security, Justice Info ve diğer uluslararası yayın organlarında yer almıştır. Şehrazat Can, hoş geldiniz. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Özlem, and greetings and salams and marhabat.
Ee,
Thank you so much for having me, for having us, and for dedicating the session to women of Afghanistan. And we are grateful to your solidarity. I was telling Özlem that in September 2021, I was in Istanbul, and I heard about the statement that you were speaking about. So we are grateful for this continued solidarity, 5 years on, half a decade, with women and girls of Afghanistan. I just want to briefly speak about the People's Tribunal for Women of Afghanistan, because my sense is I am with not only an audience that's aware of the situation in Afghanistan, but also an audience that has stood up and continues to stand up for women and girls of Afghanistan. So I don't want to go into the details of the situation necessarily, but speak about the People's Tribunal to give context for the video that we'll be watching together. We, the Afghan civil society organizations, Rawadari being one of them, the organization that I lead, with Human Rights Defenders Plus, Organization for Research and Policy Development, and Afghanistan Human Rights and Democracy Organization. We came together to organize the People's Tribunal for Women of Afghanistan with a few objectives. We were tired of waiting for formal mechanisms and for the states. We wanted to take a step ourselves as Afghans for justice, for accountability. The second objective was to give center stage to survivors, to women and girls who are suffering the repression of the Taliban, the gender persecution of the Taliban, to give them the center stage rather than to hear from experts or human rights activists or lawyers. We just wanted them to have center stage and to speak, which is what happened with the tribunal. We also wanted to counter the normalization of the Taliban. Very often when we talk to diplomats, when we try to engage with the UN, we see a trend of normalization. Taliban have an ambassador in Turkey. The Turkish government has a very normal relationship with the Taliban. They call it pragmatic engagement. There are Turkish scholarships for men and boys, but the scholarships for women are on a pause based on an understanding with the Taliban. So normalization has reached your government, as it has other governments in the region and around the world. And we really wanted to shame the governments by making them listen to survivors, to women, and what they are experiencing. And so we wanted to counter that normalization. Unfortunately, that's a big wave of normalization in Europe because they want to deport Afghans. They are normalizing relationships. And in countries in the region, like Turkey, because they have other common interests with the Taliban. And also, of course, very importantly, we wanted to create a legal record of what's happening to women and girls of Afghanistan, and to ask for a judgment and get a judgment to clarify that this is not culture or religion. It is crime. What's happening to women of Afghanistan, it is a crime. These are international crimes, and people need to be held responsible for it. The beauty of the tribunal for me was how different Afghan organizations and individuals came together to do this work. So the survivors, of course, who testified in person or remotely, sometimes we had to change their voices, because of the fears of reprisal. So they were an important part, the key part, but also the judges, 8 judges that came from different corners of the world, including Ghizaal, who will be speaking to you later, and 4 Afghan experts and scholars from different parts of Afghanistan, now in exile, who developed the indictment. And once the tribunal was happening, it was being broadcast live by Afghan media in exile. So we had moments when over 300 people were watching the tribunal, including women inside Afghanistan and girls inside Afghanistan. And the response from them was what was really overwhelming for us, because they said, the survivors are saying what we can't say. They are voicing our grievances, and we feel we are not alone. So this was the effort behind the tribunal. I won't go into much of detail now. We can come back and question and answer. I'm more eager for all of you to see the video and also to hear from Ghizaal. Thank you, Özlem. And thank you, all of you.
Thank you very much, Shaharzad. Teşekkürler. Gözde, would you be able to please pull up the video so we can watch it?
زمانی که منزل 2 رسیدیم، خواهرم به سلول انفرادی برده شد. ما و 2 خواهرم یک جا در یک سلول بودیم. اون زندان آنقدر سرد بود، هم وحشت و ترس بود و همین که هیچ پلیس زنه نبود. ما 3 نفر هر قدر خود ما را به هم دیگه یک جا نزدیک میکردیم تا کم گرم بیاییم، اما آنقدر سرد بود که اصلا گرم نمیشدیم. دقایق بعد صدای شکنجه خواهرم که ویدیویی را فرستاده بود و چهره رسانه‌ای داشت، صدای چیغ و فریاد از او را شنیدیم. این شاید برای کسایی که اینجا میشنون عادی باشه، ولی من نمیتونم با کلمات رنج و درد و او لحظه را بیان بکنم. اونا داشتن زیر شکنجه موبایل خواهرم را باز میکردن و اعتراف میگرفتن و همیشه فکر میکردن زنای افغانستان زنای هستند که حق اعتراض ندارن.
Women of Afghanistan have not and will not give up. When one door is closed, we build another. We are the descendants of generations of women who have challenged misogyny and pursued rights and dignity in face of decades of war, of forced displacement, and years of gender persecution.
We are gathered here today to bring an attention to the situation of women and girls of Afghanistan, who are enduring a systematic and brutal regime of oppression under the Taliban rule. This is not a situation of sporadic or incidental abuse. This is coordinated and sustained campaign of gender-based persecution. Through official decrees, institutional policies, and enforced violence, the Taliban have deliberately erased women from public life, banning them from education, employment, healthcare, participation in society, while also denying their most basic freedom, such as freedom of movement, expression, and have severely restricted their access to justice and healthcare.
من چندین بار قصد خودکشی در زندان کردم ولی موفق نشدم. بالاخره شبها روزا بری فکر میکردم که اگر من سنگسار شوم او چی قسم خواهد بود؟ و نام خود مدام در کنار نام فرخنده و رخشانه تصور میکردم و رضا میکردم، میگفتم که خدایا مرگ خو برم ندادی، لااقل یک کلاه ایمنی که میداشتم یک جمپر ضخیم می داشتم تا من درد که سنگ برای من پرتاب میکنه را نفهمم.
کابل هم آمدم، با زنان معترض پیوستم، جای بر زندگی نداشتم، با زنان در دادخواهی ها اشتراک کردم. در وقت طالبان ما را از خیابان ها با گاز اشکاور و با تفنگ میزد منع کرد، ما در داخل خانه ها صدا بلند میکردیم، دادخواهی میکردیم.
با اولین حرفی که ما در جاده‌های کابل به خصوص خودم روبرو شدم اویی بود که من را گفت که چادر تا درست بپوش. به خاطر چی؟ به خاطر که محیط معلوم میشه. و بعد از او بیا همراه ما گپ بزن. یعنی اینقدر خدا بالا قرار میدادن که حتی ما باید به خاطر احترام کردن از او باید پوشش خود درست میداشتیم. در این اعتراضات بیشترین بازداشت‌ها را همکارایم داشتن. تجربه هایی که داشتن واقعا سنگین بود برشون. بعد از اونا اتهام هر چیز زده شد. و قسمی که شما بیشتر یک سوال کردین، گفتین اگر کسای دیگه میتونن که جواب بگوین میشه بگوین که چطور طالب شناسایی میکنه تانه. در تجمعات طالب یک پوشش ژورنالیستی را بر خود میگرفت، کمره در پیشش می آمد و از تمام کسایی که اونجا بودن اعتراض میکردن، صدا بلند میکردن، عکس میگرفتن و اونا شناسایی میشدن.
The promises Afghanistan once made to its citizens and to the international community. Afghanistan remains bound by key international treaties, including the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, CRPD, and the Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, CEDAW.
روزی برای تداوی نزد دکتر رفتم. با آنکه لباس بلند و حجاب کامل داشتم و بر روی ویلچر بودم، دسته ای از افراد امر به معروف طالبان مرا در گوشه ای احاطه نموده گفتند لباست کوتاه است و مناسب نیست. به آنان گفتم من از ویلچر استفاده می کنم و وقتی می ایستم و از واکر کمک می گیرم. لباسی که شما می خواهید برایم مناسب نیست، چون به زمین میافتم و نمیتوانم راه بروم. اما آنان گفتند هر مشکلی هم داشته باشی باید همان لباسی را بپوشی که ما میگوییم. اگر بار دیگر تو را با لباس نامناسب ببینیم به حوزه پلیس میبرمت. با چشمانی پر از اشک به خانه بازگشتم. از آن روز به بعد امیدم را برای درس خواندن، ورزش کردن و حتی رفتن به پارک از دست دادم.
زه په یو پښتنه کورنۍ کې زیږېدلې یم. کومه چې ډېره بارسوخه کورنۍ دي، هلته نجونو ته ډېر کم د لوړو زده کړو حق ورکول کېږي. ما د لیسانس تر کچې پورې زده کړې وکړې او بل په څنګ کې د امریکایي پوهنتون څخه مې د ماسترۍ آنلاین برنامه تعقیبوله. د دغې دندې له امله مې د خپل کورنۍ مالي سپورټ هم کوه. چې کله طالبان راغله زه په کور کې نستم، زما د کورنۍ مالي سپورټ توقف ومونده. زه د هغه نجونو یو مثال یم چې په دغسې پښتنه کورنۍ کې پیدا شوي دي او زده کړې کړي دي، اوس په کور کې ټول ناست دي. ما خوشبختانه یوه لاره وموندله چې زما المان هېواد ته پناه ویوړله. ولې هغه نجونې چې په افغانستان کې پاتې دي په ډېرو مشکلاتو باندې زده کړې کړي دي، د لیسانس تر کچې حتی د ماسترۍ تر کچې پورې موږ په افغانستان کې با استعداده کادرونه لرو، ولې نن په کور کې ناست دي.
این محرومیت ها، این حق تلفی ها، همه از اینا باعث شده که زنها امروز درآمد خود از دست بدن. خانواده ها نیز فقیرتر شدن. در جامعه که من زندگی میکنم فعلا خانواده ها همگیشان به اندک کمک مردها و خیریه ها وابسته شدن و این در حال هست که زنان همون خانواده، دختران همون خانواده ها میتونن خودشان تلاش بکنن، کار داشته باشن و زندگی خود و خانوادهشان را نجات بدن. من خودم مثال میزنم برتن. من دختر خانم هستم که از یک خانواده 10 نفره میایم و کوچکترین فرد خانواده خودم هستم. در این خانواده فقط پدر جانم و 2 برادرم هستن. پدر جانم نمیتونن کار کنن، مریض هستن، ولی 2 برادرم کار میکنن و درآمد دارن. یعنی خود شما قیاس بره، این 2 برادرم که درآمد میکنن اول به زنهای خودشان برسن، بعدش به اولادهای خودشان برسن، بعدش به نیازهای خودشان برسن و بعدش به نیاز مادرشان و خواهرشان. به کدامش؟ در حقیقت فقط از ما حقوق کار گرفته نشده، حقوق کرامت و هویت ما از ما گرفته شده. نه تنها حقوق کار بلکه حقوق مدنی ما، یعنی حقوق آزادی های فردی ما، حقوق آزادی آموزش، آزادی رفت آمد، حق مالکیت ما نداریم. حضور در اجتماع ما حق نداریم که تنها بریم جایی رفت آمد بکنیم. یعنی کلن از تمام از این حقوق ما محروم هستیم.
The Islamic world cannot close its eyes on the suffering of women, children, persons with disability, and other vulnerable groups in Afghanistan. We here to call of Afghan women. We heard the call of Afghan women for bread, work, and freedom. Such a call is not a rebellion against Islam, but a voice of conscience to return religion to its holy mission, honoring humankind and upholding justice, including humanity and justice for women. We call on the world leaders, particularly leaders of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation or OIC and International Islamic Organization to give attention and to take action on the injustice in Afghanistan.
I'll be presenting the panel's concluding remarks for today. The panel of judges assures the women of Afghanistan that they have been heard.
A formal verdict based on available factual evidence and on the basis of provisions of international law will be made available within the next 2 months.
Thank you so much for producing this video. I think this happened in October of 2025, but I think not everybody knows about the tribunal. So we're really happy that you came to tell us a bit about the process. I don't know, Shaharzad, if you want to say any more before I introduce Ghizaal.
Thank you, Özlem. I just want to add that following the tribunal's judgment, which came out in December in The Hague, we have been traveling. We have taken the judgment to different places. So we have had events in Geneva, in New York, in Madrid, in Barcelona, in Cape Town, and Johannesburg in South Africa. I came to Ankara with a colleague to speak with some members of parliament and civil society about the judgment. And the judgment calls for an all-tools approach to accountability, as well as solidarity with women of Afghanistan through non-normalizing the Taliban and scholarships and resettlements and support for refugees. But I'll let Ghizaal to talk more about that. But it has really allowed us to, the judgment, the summary of the judgment is a 2-page document. I'll send here in the chat as well. It's in English. I apologize. It's just in English. But that has really been like a list of issues and calls on the international community to act.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Shaharzad. And after you share it, this is one thing that we can do. We can translate that to Turkish as well. I'd like to, my friends I see are copying in the chat the bios. I had already introduced Shaharzad, and now I want to welcome Ghizaal Haress. And I want to read her bio in Turkish. Türkçe olarak tanıtmak istiyorum. Ghizaal Haress,
I would like to introduce her in Turkish. Dr. Ghizaal Haress is a constitutional lawyer, scholar, and human rights advocate from Afghanistan. She served as the country's first ombudsperson and later as a commissioner on the Independent Commission for overseeing the implementation of the Constitution, where she worked to expose corruption, safeguard constitutional principles, and defend fundamental rights under immense political pressure. For more than a decade, Dr. Haress taught law at the American University of Afghanistan, where she continues to teach remotely to Afghan women now banned from education by the Taliban. She's currently an adjunct professor at the University of Toronto and collaborates with the International Human Rights Program to document the suppression of women under Taliban rule. She also directs the Afghan Women's Fellowship Program at Massey College, enabling Afghan women scholars to remain engaged in academic life. Her work focuses on women's empowerment, peace building, and constitutional debate, bringing Afghan women's voices to international platforms, including the United Nations. Welcome, Ghizaal.
Thank you, Özlem. Hello and greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here and for organizing this wonderful event. Before I start, I just wanted to make a quick correction. I am not a doctor. There must have been a typo in the bio. I am not a doctor, so I just wanted to clarify that. But thank you so much. I would like to echo Shaharzad. I'm also very grateful for all of you for making a space for the voices of Afghan women and for continuing to do so for the past 5 years. I believe that the solidarity that we have received from a big number of women's rights institutions around the world has really strengthened our work and has given us a lot of positive energy. I had the honor of serving as one of the judges for the People's Tribunal for Women of Afghanistan. And today I wanted to give you an overall overview of what the tribunal's decision was, why is it important, and what can we do with the decision of the tribunal. First of all, the tribunal's judgment is not a legally binding judgment. It's not a legally binding document in the same way as the judgment of an, let's say, International Criminal Court or International Court of Justice or any other court for that matter. But it is a serious document. It is an extremely important document. It is a recent legal judgment. So all of the decisions in this judgment are on the basis of international law and international human rights law, based on the testimonies of the survivors of the Taliban oppression, based on the expert evidences that participated, but at the same time also based on the Taliban's own decrees, the decrees that the Taliban have issued with regards to women, reports from many civil society organizations that were based on fact-finding missions like the ones of Rawadari, reports from the United Nations, and many other human rights organizations. But most importantly, these decisions were on the basis of international law. So what it produces at the end is a very authoritative record, public record that is based on international law. It gives Afghan women an important tool and instrument for advocacy and for accountability and for resistance at a time when, for the past 5 years, we do not have any authoritative source from any authoritative institution that would actually call the actions of the Taliban a clear and evidence-based violation of international law and international human rights law. So the central findings of this of the tribunal was mainly that the Taliban's actions and their policies since their taking power in 2001 constitutes or establishes crimes against humanity, particularly the crimes against humanity of gender persecution under Article 7 of the Rome Statute that establishes the International Criminal Court. So this is a very important finding of the tribunal, because the tribunal does not treat what the Taliban are doing, their actions, their policies, as separate, as individual, as accidental measures. They're not. They are coordinated. They are state-level policies, and they're systemic. We did not look at the ban on education. We did not look at ban on the employment as separate separate incidents or separate policies. But we're looking at the bigger picture here. We're looking at education, employment, movement, dress requirements. You just listen to a number of examples from the testimonies. And all of these together basically is silencing women and taking them away from public life. So they're coordinated. It comes in a package. It's a collective policy measure by the Taliban. So we examined these measures as together. We found that they form coordinated and institutionalized system of oppression against Afghan women. And the effect of this system is basically to remove women completely from the society and from the public life. And we have seen how that has happened step by step in the past 5 years. We also noted that what the Taliban are doing, their actions, is intentional. It's not that it's accidental. A lot of the time, maybe in the legal system, certain policies may be discriminatory, but they're not intentional. Contrary to that, the Taliban's policies and laws and decrees are all intentional. And this also shows that it's organized, it's directed by the Taliban's leadership, and then it's enforced through their ministries, their courts. They have the security forces and morality police and their local authorities. Then it's further supported by their detention system. They have systems for intimidation of women. They torture them. We heard about cases of harassment and forced confessions and even cases of enforced disappearances. And severe punishment of women who had participated in peaceful protests in Afghanistan. And so similarly as to what Shaharzad mentioned, the Taliban have have repeatedly come up with this idea that, well, this is based on Islamic law, this is based on Afghan culture, this is how our tradition has been. The tribunal, again, evidence-based, rejected this whole argument. None of what the Taliban are doing is in conformity with the religion or with the overall culture of Afghanistan. Afghanistan has a very diverse culture, and just a number of men coming and introducing policies and then naming those as culture, defining those as culture, should not be applicable on the Afghan women, especially if they're not part of defining or interpreting those cultures. The tribunal was very clear in rejecting this. The tribunal found that what the Taliban did or do is clear violation of Afghanistan's binding obligations under international law. So it's funny because the Taliban claim that they are the legitimate authority in Afghanistan and that people have accepted them. But then when it comes to international obligations, they are not going to accept them. This is contradictory. The Taliban are the de facto authorities in Afghanistan today, and that under international law makes them responsible for what's happening in Afghanistan, makes them responsible for all of the commitments Afghanistan has as a member of the international community. So the violations that the tribunal's judgment noted are violations of the convention, of a number of conventions, including CEDAW, Convention on the Rights of Child, Convention against Torture, Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, and many other international law instruments where we found that the Taliban had violated those international commitments. The fact that the Taliban's persecution of Afghan women, sometimes they have come up with this argument that this is our internal matter. It is not. They cannot, on the one side, demand to be part of the international community, but then on the other hand, reject the fact that under the international laws, they have certain obligations. This is not Afghanistan's internal matter. This is a clear violation of a huge number of international human rights principles and standards, and a violation of Afghanistan's commitment to those. So how did we reach our judgments? We listened to the testimonies of many of the Afghan women who were the survivors of these tortures and oppression by the Taliban, and they described their personal experiences. Their testimonies also showed that these were not isolated incidents. It showed how each incident is connected to the other, how they were deliberate, how there's a systematic campaign against women and to exclude them from public life, and to basically strip them from their dignity, from their autonomy, and from the public life. And what the tribunal did was to connect these lived experiences of the Afghan women to the accountability mechanisms under international law. We also had discussions on gender apartheid, and we realized that what's happening in Afghanistan is very similar to the definition of apartheid that we have seen decades ago in South Africa. For example, we see institutionalized segregation, we see exclusion, we see domination on women as a group. So the criteria is there, but there's also a gap in international law, and that gap is lack of codification of gender apartheid, because right now under international law, apartheid is only defined within the limits of racial apartheid. Because of the lack of codification of gender apartheid under international, as an international crime under international law, the tribunal made a recommendation and called on United Nations and member states to support the codification of gender apartheid as a crime against humanity, and to ensure that it becomes part of that convention, so that the overall structure within international law to protect women's human rights is further strengthened. Now, I would like to briefly talk about normalization as well. Shaharzad talked about it. And it's unfortunate that we see that normalization is becoming prevalent. And we believe that it's the responsibility of the international community to stop normalizing with the Taliban, to stop what they call the practical engagement with the Taliban. And so we have been raising these concerns for a long time. It's part of the tribunal's judgment, warning the international community against normalizing relationships with the Taliban. But what we used to see in the past was this gradual normalization of individual states and countries. But unfortunately, what happened last month in Brussels is a dangerous escalation when it comes to normalization and engagement with the Taliban. We were really horrified to see this engagement happening at the European Commission level, where with the participation of 15 European states. But honestly, what bothers me the most is that it includes Netherlands and Germany. And it bothers me the most that Germany is one of these countries that had a very primary role in making this happen and bringing this together. And why is it bothering me the most? Because these are the two countries that also are the ones, two of the four countries that brought a claim against the Taliban for violation of women's rights and for violation of CEDAW. And there's a potential case that will come to the International Court of Justice. Now, these dual policies of these states are questionable. I'm going to be very frank here, but it makes us doubt their commitment when it comes to protection of women's rights and upholding international human rights and upholding international human rights law. So if on the one hand, if we are trying to say, okay, we're segregating the deportation policies from women's rights, but then we bring the same group that violates women's rights to these tables in Europe, in Brussels, what kind of message are we giving and what are we doing? I believe what this all does, it empowers the Taliban. It has empowered states individually, have empowered the Taliban, but when they come together as a collective and in such scale, they give the Taliban more leverage. They give the Taliban more kind of legitimacy, not formal legitimacy, but some sort of legitimacy. And it empowers them as a group because they think they are needed at the international level. And then that comes at a cost where states have to overlook. They have to overlook what's happening in Afghanistan with regards to women. So I hope that the governments do recognize that this kind of diplomatic accreditation they're giving to the Taliban, some of them have given control of embassies, some of them invite them to these high-level political meetings. All of these only benefit the Taliban, but it's going to really impact Afghan women adversely. And instead, the countries, we expect that these countries should cooperate. These countries that we're talking about are parties to the Rome Statute. Currently, there are arrest warrants against Taliban leaders. These countries could do that. Many of these countries, including Belgium itself, could use many other strategies against the Taliban. They could use the terminology is skipping my brain right now, but they could use they could probably arrest and yes, Shaharzad?
Universal jurisdiction, I think Nazila.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. They could use universal jurisdiction to hold these individuals to account. Instead, what they're doing, they're inviting them to these meetings and probably accommodating them in these luxury hotels and what not. So these are the kind of issues that tells us where the international community is headed. It's dangerous. Today's the Women of Afghanistan, but with the trend we see around the world, this whole trend of authoritarianism, this whole trend of lack of regard to human rights, and particularly lack of regard to women's rights, is probably going to bring similar patterns to so many other countries when it comes to women. So that's something that we have to keep in mind, and the states should rather or would rather be helping and bringing these individuals to account rather than giving them platform. I'm going to summarize here. I hope that as women's groups that we have come here, we could, or you as strong Turkish women could work with your governments, could take these initiatives such as the Tribunal to your governments, to your parliamentarians, discuss it more among your civil society organizations so that they understand what actually is happening in Afghanistan. I hope that we can demand more transparency against this quiet diplomacy a number of countries are leading with the Taliban, to disclose what these meetings are about, what are they talking, are women's issues a part of the agenda. I think it's also extremely important, especially for Turkish women who are of Islamic background, to talk about the fact that what the Taliban are doing does not have basis in Islamic law. It's important that the world listens to Muslim women, because what they're doing in the name of Islamic law, it's not confirmed by a single Islamic entity, Islamic authority, Islamic organization. But what we need to do is amplify that. We need to talk about it more, to challenge this whole interpretation of the Taliban of Islam, by which they're depriving women of education, they're depriving them of their rights, they're depriving them of their autonomy, of their bodily autonomy. I think it's extremely important. And I think I would like to just finish by saying that the message of the tribunal and of the judgment is very simple, is that women are entitled to their rights, to the very basic human rights. They're entitled to equality. They're entitled to having access to justice, to an impartial system of justice, and to participation in the society. And these rights should not be negotiable, and the world should not use normalization to negotiate these rights with the Taliban. Thank you so much again for giving us this opportunity. Thank you for your tireless efforts to support women in general, but for your support of Afghan women. We do count on these international supports, because where the world is heading, the direction the world is heading, I don't think that any women groups of one country can really uphold the rights of women. We need to come together and to uphold the rights of women under international law. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ghizaal, for this summary of the judgment of the tribunal and the points that you made about what could be done. I think these are very important for us to consider and talk about, and also act on. So thank you so much. I have a very quick question, and then I'm going to open it up. As the moderator, I'll ask a very quick question to follow up, but then I want to open it up for other people's questions and comments. And I'll ask everybody to limit themselves to 1 or 2 minutes so we can make the best use of the time. Arkadaşlar, ben bir soru sorduktan sonra geçen sene Uluslararası Ceza Mahkemesi'nin Taliban liderleri
there was a kind of decision about the arrest of the I'm going to pass about the Q&A section, and please limit yourself to 1 or 2 minutes, your questions and your comments, please. So we would like to use the time logically, and so it would be possible to talk for everyone.
You didn't call it you didn't put it as hypocrisy, but in a sense, that aspect is definitely there, with governments on the one hand saying they're upholding women's rights and making taking the Taliban to task at CEDAW with the CEDAW committee or with the international legal system, but on the other hand, hosting them in Brussels and contributing to the normalization of the Taliban. On the other hand, there is the ICC's ruling, and I think also the CEDAW committee last year made a statement reviewing the Taliban's practices. Could you briefly talk about the decisions and what they have delivered, if anything, in the case of the ICC's ruling on Taliban leaders?
Sure. The ICC has an open investigation against Afghanistan for the last couple of years, but after 2021, they focused the investigation on the violation of women's rights. And I believe it was in 2023 or 24 when they issued, I'm sorry, I don't have the exact date, when they issued arrest warrants against two of the Taliban leaders, the supreme leader of 2025, the supreme leader of the Taliban and their chief justice and the charges are under Article 7 and for the women's for the persecution of women under Article 7. So that's what the ICC's arrest warrant for now is. But there's a challenge to that. The challenge is like any other arrest warrants against the top leaders that we have seen. We have seen this in the case of Bashar al-Assad. We have seen that in the case of Putin, Netanyahu. The problem is that unless they go to a third country where ICC has jurisdiction, it's not going to be possible for those individuals to be arrested. So there are ways to avoid it. And until that happens, until that takes place, we don't know when and we don't know how. So that's the major challenge we have with the case in ICC. Even if we assume that the ICC case, the individuals are arrested and a case is initiated, the proceedings start, the problem would be with the time it will take. We have seen a number of cases under the ICC, including the recent ones on gender persecution that would take years to come. That's why there was more hope that at least the case of CEDAW will start sooner. But unfortunately, even under the potential claim to the ICJ, it's taking infinite period of time. Even though the claim was brought or was initiated in September of 2024, the problem is that they're still in the negotiation phase. Under the CEDAW, there's a 6-month negotiation. Sorry, there's a negotiation phase, 6 months arbitration phase, and then the case could be brought before the ICJ. The negotiation phase, unfortunately, does not have a timeline. And therefore, these 4 countries, Germany, Netherlands, Canada, and Australia, have taken almost 2 years now to continue negotiations with the Taliban. And they're not getting into the next stage, which could be arbitration, which is 6 months, and then maybe a potential case. I have argued in the past that these countries, if they are negotiating with the Taliban over the past almost 2 years, while at the same time we have seen even more severe policies against women from the Taliban side, this clearly shows that these negotiations are going on without good faith. And if there's no good faith in a legal negotiation process, then it's the time for the parties on the other side to go to the next level, because Taliban are not negotiating in good faith. And that's an extremely important element of the negotiation to be kept in mind. However, like I gave the examples earlier, countries have other priorities. 2 of these countries, Germany and Netherlands, are also actively advocating for deportation. So those probably are priorities compared to putting the women's rights in the case of ICJ as their priority. So this is what's happening with the ICJ case and the ICC case. It's difficult to think and to talk about a timeline within which these proceedings under any of these mechanisms could start.
Thank you so much, Ghizaal. And I think this also highlights how important it was for the tribunal to be organized, considering the lack of response really on something that's urgent and vital for women and girls. I mean, if they started elementary school 5 years ago, they're in middle school now. And this is something I always think about my own 2 daughters and how difficult it is to imagine. You get suffocated just imagining. So I want to turn to those who are here. Arkadaşlar, sorularınız varsa veya yorumlarınız, I see we have people here from Afghanistan. I want to give priority to folks who might want to make comments. If not, the floor is open to everyone.
I have a question.
Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Abid Iskandar. First of all, thank you all of you for all of your wonderful speech. So I am a master student at the University of North Texas, and I am Dr. Altıok's student. So I am lucky to be here and listen all of your speech. So my question to Ms. Haress, so you talked about the case in ICC. So I'm thinking about, for instance, the verdict about the case will come against Afghan government. So will it be useful for then for the women of Afghanistan? And in your speech, you told that some countries are giving informal legitimacy to Afghan government. And additionally, I read in newspaper that Afghan officials are traveling to many European countries. So I'm concerned about the verdict. So how will it be useful for the Afghan women?
Thank you.
Are we answering one by one, or should we?
If you could quickly answer this question, we can take them in groups later.
Sure. The case in the ICC against 2 of the top leaders of the Taliban, the Supreme Leader and the Chief Justice, is extremely important because the Taliban leader directly issues a number of directives, policies, and decrees that keep limiting or violating women's rights. And the Chief Justice has this infamous book within which they are basically demeaning women to a secondary position or to a secondary citizen of the country, and officially allowing men's dominance over women. And it's also important because in any given country, when there are policies and laws created by other branches of the government, you require an impartial, independent judiciary where you can go and you can ask for justice, for reinstating of those rights. Here, the system works together. The laws, it's not that we have lack of laws. There's like dozens of laws and policies and directives by the Taliban on women. And then there's no elected parliament, so there's no oversight of a popular public institution on the executive. And then the third branch of the government, which is the judiciary, is basically implementing and following those decrees. So that also tells you that when we talk about the Taliban having a coordinated, institutionalized system of operation, we have to keep in mind that this is not just Taliban within the executive branch. This is Taliban within all state institutions. They work in coordination with each other to make this operation of women and this domination take place. So if those 2 individuals are arrested and the ICC case goes forward, it is going to be very, very helpful. But I believe it's not going to resolve the entirety of what's going on in Afghanistan with regards to women's rights. If we want to really see an impact on women's rights and women's lives in Afghanistan, we need to follow a certain number of initiatives. ICC's case is great, but it's going to be against individuals. individuals can be replaced. But if we are looking on the case of ICJ, under the ICJ, it's Afghanistan as a state that's responsible. And Afghanistan as a state being responsible under international law could result in bringing systemic change and systemic reform. That's something that distinguishes ICC with ICJ. So we need to focus on both of those. Any of them as an individual process is going to be helpful, but if we want to see change, the proceedings have to go on under both of those. And the other initiatives that are going on right now have to be continued. For example, this investigative mechanism under the UN that's trying to work on documentation of the evidences. And so these have to go together in order for the system to be properly exposed in terms of what it's doing, and for the international courts, for the two of these international courts to be able to issue their decisions, and then each of these decisions are going to be complementary to each other. So the leaders will be prosecuted as individuals and under the ICJ, which I should not forget to mention that if this case goes to the ICJ, it's going to be the very first case ever being brought in the ICJ under CEDAW. And therefore, it's going to be of immense importance for women's rights internationally. So they have to complement each other in order for it to help Afghan women.
Thank you.
Shaharzad, please add if I'm forgetting anything in here.
Thank you so much for this comprehensive response. There are a couple of questions. I'm gonna ask arkadaşlar söz almak isteyen, sorusunu yazılı olarak iletmek isteyen varsa ben Hülya'nın sorusunu önce sormak istiyorum. Hülya Gül the edict that Taliban issued about previous divorces not being valid. And is this news that we have received and read about correct? And can you say a couple of words on that? A second question that was really, I think, sent to me privately is about the situation of Sıdıka, which made it to the news in Turkey. The girl who was forced to marry a 65-year-old man for the debt that her father owed this man. So if you could comment on both the edict regarding previous divorces being invalid, and also if you know the current situation of Sıdıka, please. Either Shaharzad, if you want to take those, or Ghizaal.
Thank you. I can share a little bit, and John, please feel free, of course, to add. On the decree on divorces, that is accurate. That was a few years ago, and some women were then forced back to. We documented, I think, 1 or 2 cases of women actually then being forced back to move back in with husbands that they had sought a divorce from. So then Taliban have since then have made divorce almost impossible for women. They recently came up with a decree on separation of spouses, which essentially says women can hardly ever separate without a man's consent. Men have to consent to the divorce, otherwise it's just not possible. And I think the question, I mean, as John was talking about the lack of domestic accountability. So if you're a woman who is being abused physically, if you are a woman who is being abused emotionally or economically by your husband or his family or anyone, you have no legal remedy under the Taliban. None of this is considered a crime. If you're being physically abused in a way that you have obvious bruises or broken bones, then you can go to the Taliban court. But you can't go to the Taliban court without a mahram, to the Taliban judicial system without a mahram. So then you have to convince a male family member who is a mahram to you to take you to Taliban courts to prove. The burden of proof is on the woman to prove that your husband has broken your bone. And once you succeed in doing this, he will be imprisoned for 15 days. and then following which he will come back and live with you. So it doesn't give you an incentive to actually complain, because guess what? If you put him in jail for 15 days, he's not going to come back and be very nice to you, is he? So there is a complete absence of justice for women. There are also shelters are illegal, so women who live under abuse can either live with abuse, or unfortunately we have a lot of anecdotal evidence of attempts at suicide and self-harm, and the mental health situation of women is horrific. This brings me to Siddiqa's example, to your second question. I got in touch with contacts who are in touch with her family and to ask permission to share again and what their specific demands are. She's a Turkmen woman from the Turkmen community. So the elders of the Turkmen community are now trying to speak to the Taliban to see if they can get her released from prison, but she remains imprisoned for refusing to marry. And they have asked us to continue our efforts and advocacy for her. And they have also asked if it's possibility of support to her and her family after she's released, if she's released, because it would be impossible for her to live in Badghis, because she will, now that her case is so publicly known as well, she and her family will be harassed in the community, possibly with people loyal to Taliban. So I don't know if anyone here, I know the situation with the Turkish government is not is complicated, but if we can raise voices and do advocacy for her, for the governments to talk to the Taliban to ensure her release, and then some form of evacuation or resettlements for her and her family, at least till she feels safer again, but she still remains in prison.
Thank you so much, Shaharzad. I think we can consider all of this information that you shared with us and suggestions in one of our future weekly meetings. Definitely. Soru var mı arkadaşlar? Soru.
Any other comments or questions?
Nazila Elmi, who is also from Afghanistan and a volunteer, a member of EŞİK, who has traversed continents like some of us. Nazila, would you like to say a few words? I know you've both worked on this academically, but also have done work on human rights of women in Afghanistan.
Yes, merhabalar hocam, salam Üstad Haress ve Hanım Shaharzad. Herkese merhabalar. Öncelikle I will switch back and forth between Farsi, Turkish, and English, I guess, throughout this. But I have been working with EŞİK for a while, since my undergraduate program in Turkey and my transition in the US after to do my master's in starting my academic journey and research here. And I'm very grateful for the solidarity of Turkish women from as Özlem discussed, from the very first discussions to the initiatives, international solidarity initiatives. I think everything Ustad Haress and Khanum Akbar mentioned, they were very comprehensive, and they're very much senior to me, so I'm humbled. I guess everyone in EŞİK has already heard me so much before this, so everything they said was very comprehensive. I just want to add to everything that was said, that intersectional experiences of women and how gender apartheid operates within this intersecting and interlocking system of oppression and power. And as Shaharzad mentioned, this woman who was imprisoned is of Turkmen ethnicity, and Hazara women and Uzbek women and other Shognani women and other ethnic minorities and religious minorities are doubly impacted under the gender apartheid in the system and this oppressive system regime of the Taliban. Ve evet, çok teşekkür etmek istiyorum Özlem hocama, herkese ve biraz çok katmanlı.
I would like to,
Özbek, Hazara, Tacik.
I would like to talk something about the intersectional and
çok katmanlı sorunlar yaşadıklarından ve
and their complicated problems and their struggle are much more difficult.
çok teşekkür ederim herkese.
But thank you very much to all for the program and event. And thank you, Özlem, for this meeting. And it was very nice to see you all.
Thank you, Nazila. Nazila has also done a master's thesis on this very issue, the intersectional oppressions women suffer in Afghanistan. Thank you so much for that contribution. That's really important. Süheyla.
Merhaba. Öncelikle Ghizaal ve Shaharzad'a çok teşekkür ediyorum sevgili
And
Özlem.
thank you very much, and Özlem and the others.
Afganistan dışında yaşayan
And
kadınlar olarak ve özellikle de çok
as women who are living abroad and who are struggling, are you taking any threats from Taliban, and do you live some kind of security problems? And so I was so much concerned about yourself, and so what would you like to tell about it?
Who would like to take that? Nazila, Shaharzad, Ghizaal.
Özlem, please go ahead. I think you are a better person to respond to that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for attending, and thank you for participation. If I understood, I just want to make sure that I understood the question correctly. It's about the security threats facing women activists outside Afghanistan?
Yes, like
Yes.
yourselves.
Yes, I mean, I think the biggest risks are really faced by women who are based in the region, in Iran and Pakistan, because these governments are friendly to the Taliban. Additionally, these women are at constant risk of deportation, and after the women inside Afghanistan who are at the front line of the resistance against the Taliban, it's the women in the region that I am most concerned with, and that I have seen experiencing the worst forms of pressures. Unfortunately, because of the conflict between Pakistan and Afghanistan, and because of the US war on Iran, all these wars led by men and started by men impacts women, of course. So Iran has been deporting Afghan women back to Afghanistan, and families and men, and similarly Pakistan. And of course, Turkey has also been forcing, I think primarily men, but Afghans back to Afghanistan. And so we have had emergency instance of women activists who are imprisoned in Afghanistan by the Taliban, who are then released, who have come to Pakistan, continued their activism, being forced back to Afghanistan, which definitely puts their lives at risk. We have had survivors of torture by the Taliban being forced back and deported back into Afghanistan by governments in the region. And now Germany is talking to the Taliban, or Europe is talking to the Taliban, because they also want to start deportations. In fact, they have started deportations. So I think this anti-migration sentiment is actually one of the risks to Afghan human rights community everywhere, because it's not possible to do human rights work inside Afghanistan. People are doing it from exile, but in exile, the anti-migration sentiment means that Afghans have to cut back or fear for their lives or safety or deportations, including also, I must say, my own colleagues are in the US, and part of the reason they aren't public about their work is the Taliban, because they have families inside Afghanistan, but part of it is because they are in the US, and the US is trying to find excuses to deport Afghans as well. And the US is against the International Criminal Court, for instance, and we work with the International Criminal Court. So it's a very lonely and scary world for human rights defenders generally, but for Afghan women human rights defenders specifically.
Thank you so much, Shaharzad. It's very important, the anti-immigrant sentiment, xenophobia that's impacting people who've already been displaced and
Özlem, sorumun bir kısmı da Taliban kuvvetlerinin tehdidi var mı? Ulaşabiliyorlar mı bir
Actually,
şekilde?
I was also wondering, a part of my question was about whether the Talibani forces can also reach out to you when you're abroad, when you're out of
Yes, thank you.
Afghanistan, although you're not based in
Additionally,
Afghanistan.
whether there is a direct threat from the Taliban, if they are pursuing or if they are harassing you all. Nazila, do you want to address that? Maybe, and then I can ask Shaharzad or Ghizaal to address that part of Suheila's question.
Yes, unless I mean, I guess they should be prioritized in this conversation, unless Ustad Haress or Shaharzad has something to say, I can then add to it.
Just go ahead and respond with your part, I think.
Yeah, I was a part of I mean, when I came to Texas and spoke in your class before that, I was a part of Asia Democracy Roundtable Summit, and we talked about transnational repression. And we have seen it not largely, but in the UK, for instance, we had an Afghan journalist stabbed in his apartment. And we are not sure. I mean, it's most probably the Taliban. So usually when we make these kind of investigations and speculations, it's usually speculative that this person was targeted mainly because they were very outspoken about their work in the Taliban. We had an Afghan woman threatened in France. That was very much, she is an athlete. She's an Afghan athlete. She was very much the threat was very much direct to her, and it's very much public and out there as well. But it's harder to, in these kind of cases, to prove whether it was the Taliban or not. But the transnational regression exists, and also as someone who has done open source intelligence with Afghan Witness, we constantly came across Taliban are very sophisticated with social media and AI and on Twitter with their propaganda. They would hack women's accounts or journalists' accounts and women's activists. So there is that element of online threat where there is transnational repression. I have not personally experienced it myself, but I have gotten messages online, and it's never, for me, I'm never able to verify whether this person is a part of, affiliated with the Taliban or not. But there are ways to do that when you're working in open source intelligence or to make speculations. So, so those kind of things that have been happening, and obviously, as Shaharzad John said, very much so with the ICE and everything, and a lot of erosion of human rights, especially that the term gender being very problematic itself in the US and being removed from the YONAMA, mandate, and a lot of, and some elements of it being removed from the renewed mandate has had, I mean, its own impacts on activists abroad and in exile as well.
Thank you so much, Nazila. Should I move to other questions? Shaharzad and Ghizaal, I'm looking at you, or do you want to address this one still?
I'm happy to respond to the second question on feminist solidarity, which has been posted, or any other questions that you might raise. And I might have to at some point go off the camera because my children are coming for me.
That's okay. We like seeing children. We don't have a problem with that. But that's a great question to begin with. But the other question, let me also relay. Sanırım bakıyorum Nazik'ten de sanırım bir soru vardı.
I'm
Onu da
having a look.
almaya
I think
çalışıyorum
there
ama
was a question
ilerlemiş.
from Nazik as well, but there are more
Would you please go
lines
ahead and
in the
address
chat.
that question while I collect the question about feminist solidarity, and I will pose the other one that I'm looking for. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really big question, and one that we are thinking actually about in Rawadari's work itself, because we were recently in South Africa, and of course we were there to learn from their experience and to also build solidarity with women of Afghanistan, but we also had to think about what kind of solidarity can we offer our colleagues in South Africa, because all these movements, we are all interconnected, and it's in standing with each other and that we can have more of an impact. And for me, it's really, for us in Rawadari, it's really about respecting those who are on the front line of struggles and taking our cues from them. So, for instance, in the case of South Africa, one of the things that we heard from activists there was that we are paying a high cost for our solidarity with Palestine, and we would like you to stand with us. That's what solidarity to us means, that you stand with us for the cause of Palestine, because we are paying such a high cost for this cause internally and through pressure from different governments, primarily the US, but also others. And I think in terms of, I think I'm not in a position to comment on whether, where the feminist movements are really currently getting it wrong. But I do think that when we look at, for instance, again, because example of South Africa is so fresh in my mind, when we look at the anti-apartheid struggle, there was global solidarity. And for the cause of women of Afghanistan, EŞİK is an exception, not the norm. Most feminist groups do not engage on Afghanistan consistently. Maybe initially after the fall of Kabul and takeover of Taliban, there was a moment where some feminists paid attention, some feminist movements. But a lot of them Afghanistan has fallen off the agenda. And it's the worst women's rights crisis. It is, I think, a burning cause for feminist movements around the world. So we are puzzled. We don't know why we don't have more attention and focus on this issue. We don't know how Taliban can walk into Brussels and Belgian feminists are not standing out there outside the foreign ministry saying, why is this happening in my country under my name as a Belgian feminist? We are not sure what we are missing. We are trying to figure it out.
Thank you so much, Shaharzad. There is a question about, I mean, this is what you just said is so very important. I said this at the beginning. This is for women, the biggest human rights crisis we have. And it hasn't been mentioned explicitly, but we talk about the process of Talibanization in Turkey as well. Some of the things that you talked about, we see from different segments. Yes, we don't have the government that looks like Taliban, but we have the forces that do argue. Just yesterday, somebody sent to our WhatsApp group a video of a hoja, of a so-called Islamic scholar, has nothing to do with Islam, the kinds of things that he's saying. Yes, you should not send your girls to school because they will go. There is a lot of this, that normalization, as Ghizaal talked about, the normalization of the Taliban has done to give permission to movements to speak these unimaginable things, that the most basic rights that are becoming open for debate, which cannot be. And the women's movements, feminist movements, I think, are the only bulwark. So it's really important, the kind of work that you all have done. There was a question about the Taliban's position on the on Afghans that are living in other countries, such as Turkey. This was, I think, Nazik's question. If there is if you have anything to say on how they approach, the Taliban approaches the social group of Afghans living in Turkey, and how this attitude may affect women. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm not familiar with that situation.
Mm-hmm. There's another question, whether you think that Taliban can be undermined by the internal dynamics within the country, if this is a possibility, if there is any form of opposition inside the country.
Thank you, Özlem. I can take that question and colleagues can add, but also the earlier question about Turkey, although we don't have concrete information, we know that one of the things that Taliban really rely on is having people, particularly men, visit Afghanistan and then put pictures on their social media, videos, etc., including international, influencers, etc., talking about how safe Afghanistan is. Of course, it's safe if you're a man who doesn't disagree with the Taliban. But I think that's their strategy, mostly with Afghans in diaspora as well, trying to welcome them, the mainers particularly, so that they can do a kind of PR job for the Taliban and saying, oh, it's very safe. We traveled everywhere. We had this delicious watermelon in Nuristan. And so all is well and life is lovely. So that's another battle that we have to fight constantly, saying safe for who? You know, not safe for women, not safe for religious minorities, not safe for ethnic minorities, not safe for a lot of different communities who are under pressure. So I think that's something that's very important to address. And then in terms of the dynamics within the Taliban, we hear about these dynamics, you know, these disagreements, but the trend that we have seen consistently, unfortunately, since they came to power, is consolidation of power. They are trying to silence any voices within and outside that disagrees with the supreme leader. And more institutions and resources are being controlled by the supreme leader, based in Kandahar, the man no one has seen. But this means that the intelligence department of the Taliban has become stronger and stronger and is the key force for repressing dissent, as well as the Ministry for Promotion of Virtue and Prevention of Voice. This ministry has been given more and more legal authority with every new decree, and their legal authorities are direct infringement on people's private lives, on people's freedoms, particularly women's. So they stop women on the street. You heard about Herat probably. You detain women for how they are dressed. They walk into wedding halls. They walk into private schools. They walk into madrasas. They walk into shops and markets to enforce the supreme leader's decrees. And they are given immense powers under law. So even if there are groups within the Taliban or leaders within the Taliban who may agree on some basic issues like girls can go to school, they are not gaining the upper hand in any way. And in terms of ideology, there is a coherence of ideology. So even if there are deviations, saying some Taliban leaders saying, oh, we want the schools for girls to open, but ideologically, they have the same vision for Afghanistan, which is even in those schools, the curriculum that they want to promote, the ideology that they want to promote is the one that continues the life of this regime. So unfortunately, very much ideologically, there are different shades of the same idea.
This is a very bleak picture in response, but thank you, Shaharzad. In a few minutes, we will have to wrap up, and Özgür is asking a question. Özgür, briefly, please.
Çok kısa soracağım. Acaba şu anda Taliban rejiminin
Yes, it will be very brief. I wonder whether the Taliban regime right now has a police force or enforcement authorities consisting of women, female members, and what role does this play in terms of the violence that is exerted over the women in Afghanistan?
Who would like to take that? Shaharzad, Ghizaal?
I didn't get the first part of the question.
The question is whether there is a female law enforcement arm of the Taliban that is working like the police, like we have in Iran. That's the question. What role they play?
I believe they do have a number of female officers that I have heard of, but I understand that Shaharzad, her organization have done research on these, so I probably would allow Shaharzad to respond to the question.
Thank you, Ghizaal. It is indeed true that the Taliban have a woman as part of the police force for security searches of women in the airport and some other designated institutions, but also they have a limited patrol, women's patrol, as part of the Taliban morality patrol that goes around and stops cars or lectures people, advises people on Islamic conduct. And there have been instances of Taliban's female morality police getting into arguments and physical altercations with women as well about hijab. And I think that's something that we didn't really go into, but a very dangerous aspect of what Taliban are doing in Afghanistan is they're implementing their long-term vision for social transformation. Since Taliban came back to power, all madrasas that have existed in Afghanistan for a long time, but all of them have been asked to register with the Taliban. That's giving them oversight at the curriculum of madrasas, but they have also opened their own new madrasas, including jihadi, what they call jihadi madrasas. In these madrasas, it's very hard to get a lot of information from inside them because they're tightly controlled. But while the schools remain closed, girls are encouraged to attend madrasas, girls above age 11. And in these madrasas, from anecdotal evidence, we know that they're being taught really extreme sexist, misogynist curriculum as religious curriculum. And the idea that the Taliban have, I think their plan is that they will alter the youth of Afghanistan and their mentality to the extent that in 6 years from now, if they run for elections, people will vote for them. This is the dangerous part of what's happening in Afghanistan that we pay very little attention to, that they are trying to destroy the fabric, social fabric of the country. They are trying to convert religious minorities. They are trying to force their interpretation of religion as the only interpretation of religion. And they are basically using faith and religion as a tool for repression, control, but also brainwashing. And there are these women who will willingly go out on Taliban's behalf to repress, oppress, humiliate other women. And we will see more and more of this if this trend doesn't stop.
Thank you, Shaharzad. I will join a few of the questions in the chat and get maybe a couple of minutes from each of you before we close. I'm going to try to do this with Süheyla''s final question and also the question about what gives you hope. What gives you hope under these circumstances that you so skillfully described that are very bleak, point a very bleak picture. And also what, other than hope, what kind of act and actions would you expect, would you suggest to us? I have taken some notes myself, but I'd like to give the floor to you for a couple of maybe ideas for what we can do as women in Turkey to stand in solidarity and amplify some of the findings of the tribunal and help alleviate the situation a little bit for women in Afghanistan. Thank you. Maybe we can take a couple of minutes of response from each of you, and then I will close the meeting.
Okay, let me start. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here and for your support. What gives me hope is this constant struggle of Afghan women, whether they're inside Afghanistan, whether they're outside Afghanistan. Every now and then there are young girls, very young, who are probably right now in primary school, who talk about their dreams, who talk about the fact that they have dreams and they have ambitions and that that's what they want to do. It makes me hopeful to see that I engage with a number of women inside the country, and the way they struggle, even the smallest opportunities they get, the way they work hard, the way they are after education, that gives me a lot of hope. That tells me that they are not giving up. And the women, Afghan women outside, even though it has been 5 years of leaving Afghanistan, it doesn't feel like 5 years. It feels like we left yesterday, and we feel responsible for doing something for that country. And that sense of responsibility gives me hope and makes us go on every day. And I think in terms of acts and actions, I already talked in the beginning, but I would just like to emphasize that, first of all, we need to talk about this issue as much as we can. The world is so bleak right now with all the conflict and all going on, that the plight of Afghan women is easily forgotten. You need to be in the headlines for any attention to be given to you. And unfortunately, Afghan women are not on the headlines for a long time now. So I think it's important that we talk about what's happening in Afghanistan. In any platform we need to talk about it, and we need to talk about the severity of the situation, and we need to talk about the impact, as Shaharzad very nicely discussed. What are the long-term impact of what's going on in Afghanistan? And more importantly, for all of you in here, I think for Muslim women, it's important to raise their voices to say, this is not Islam. And for us to to own our own interpretation of what Islamic law is when it comes to women. And that's, I think, a very important thing we can do as women to challenge this whole narrative, this whole interpretation of limiting women's rights under Islam. We need to speak out on it. Thank you so much to all of you.
Thank you so much to you, Ghizaal. Shaharzad?
Thank you. It's very hard to add to what Ghizaal John said in terms of what gives me hope. But I think, yes, women's creativity as well, because they are finding ways, even under the Taliban, to continue learning, to continue educating, to continue mobilizing. You know, they write poetry and they share it with the world without their faces, without their names, but they put their poetry out to the world through social media. They create art, they write stories, they code, they, they translate, they think, their brains, they contribute, they try to find solutions, they try to connect. And I'm amazed. This is like a friend told me in Herat, she's from Herat and her family lives there, and she said, it's like a cat and mouse. The women in my family, they play a cat and mouse game with the Taliban. They always try to stay a step ahead. You know, if Taliban close the gym, they find another friend whose house they can go to exercise. If Taliban are banning something, if their Taliban are banning, women from writing, a young woman in Herat does a calligraphy of the Quran, the full text of Quran, so that way she can get some visibility. If they're always creatively finding, and I think this creativity, this courage. And one other thing that gives me hope is that feminist solidarity around the world, and women trying to keep life alive in face of militarization, in face of abuse, in face of pressure. And in Turkey, I found that very special because I was in an event in January organized by CIS. And there was solidarity with women in Palestine, with women in Iran, and women in Afghanistan. And Turkish feminists in Turkey really know that there is, all of these causes are together. So that solidarity really gives me hope. In terms of what we hope, what we expect, we ask the Turkish government to revive and actually engage with the Taliban and allowing scholarships for women, because Afghan women have been coming to Turkey since 1920 to pursue an education. That was the first group of Afghan women under King Amanullah who came to Turkey to pursue an education abroad. Then they went back and started high schools, etc. So it seems like a small step, but it can help a few women and their communities. Every Afghan woman serves a community or more. So the scholarships is something very concrete. And that the Turkish government is really involved, dealing a lot with the Taliban. I was hoping that a joint parliamentary group of women from the Turkish government at some point holds a hearing on the situation of Afghanistan. You know, some transparency. What's the government saying to them? What do they expect? Why are they silent? Some form of, I know in the current climate of political instability, that's very, very hard, but it's another idea that's very specific. And then standing against the normalization. I mean, 15th August is 5 years, it's a decade. I'm sure there will be a statement from, I hope, and I think there will be a statement from EŞİK Platform, but more generally, I hope there are small and big acts of solidarity from Turkey with Women of Afghanistan on the 5th anniversary. And please inform us about it so then we can share it with Afghan media so it's covered so women in Afghanistan can hear that message of solidarity and know they are not alone.
Thank you so much, Shaharzad. Thank you again to both of our speakers, to Ghizaal Haress and Shaharzad Akbar. I am not able to take any more calls. I have to respect the time and agreement with our translators as well as our speakers who are being waited on by their children, at least one of them, we know, and I have one over here. So apologies, I need to wrap up, but on your last point, Shaharzad, I want to remind everyone that today's meeting was attended by 75 to 80 people for most of these 2 hours, and 2 hours into it, we've never been under 60, so there is definitely great interest and intention to keep acting in solidarity. Among those were many actually members of parliament who stepped in and out, and also political party leaders from different parties. I said at the beginning, but this is one of the strengths of EŞİK. We have people from different political viewpoints and different party affiliations as well. I think this is a strength, and that might perhaps, it's a challenge, but it may facilitate perhaps some of the actions in parliament. This notion Ghizaal mentioned of the sense of responsibility, giving us a sense of hope, is something I think that we take to heart. We really are in awe of the resistance that women are putting up. And we promise you, I promise you on behalf of all of us, because I know the collective has done it for 5 years, so it's not my personal promise, that we will amplify the voices of women and girls in Afghanistan, and we will work against the normalization of the Taliban, because it is a threat directly facing Afghan girls and women, but it is a threat also facing all of us and all the women everywhere. This is a possibility that none of us want to fathom, but it shows us how fragile women's human rights are, and how things can go south very, very fast. I want to end with the motto that we use in almost all of our EŞİK statements for years now. Hayatlarımızdan, haklarımızdan, hayallerimizden vazgeçmiyoruz.
We are not giving up our
lives, our rights, or our dreams. And we are proud and we are happy to see that neither do Afghan women and girls. And we will continue to work together to ensure that the rights, the lives, and the dreams of women and girls everywhere can be fulfilled and achieved. Thank you for joining. Thank you, everyone. And we will be in touch and in solidarity.
Thank you, Özlem. Thank you to the translators as well, and to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you Müge and Çiğdem for the translation work. Thank you everyone. İyi geceler arkadaşlar. Görüşmek üzere.
Emeği geçen herkese çok teşekkürler. Teşekkürler arkadaşlar. Çok iyiydi toplantı. Özlem, sana da ayrıca çok teşekkürler.